Hello, I'm Robert, voluntary fact checker and helping you if you're scared of many things. And now, this is following on from my video about how positive things are with the Ukraine war ceasefire and peace deal negotiations. So, now this is a very minor item in the news. It's already happened. It's not something that's going to happen. It happened yesterday, I think. And I don't see it in the mainstream news anywhere. I think this may be, to a certain extent, deliberate, but it's a real game changer from Ukraine's point of view. So what happened, you can see this video here. Now, see that explosion there? That was, you see that big splash there? Then that is a submarine that's here. So some of you may remember, if you follow the war quite closely, that, will this maximize? Yes. So the Ukrainians, the Russians their Black Sea Fleet was stationed here in Sevastopol. And then over the first, one or 2 years of the war, they were gradually forced out of that. And they had to evacuate Sevastopol because their ships were no longer safe there anymore. And they moved their ships out to Novorossiysk, however you say that, Novorossiysk. I don't know how you say that, but that Russian city. So they moved there's a port there, and they moved all their ships there, because that was especially first of all with the Ukrainian Neptune, and then with the Storm Shadow, and various other missiles. And then with the what they call the Sea Baby, which was surface unmanned vehicles, and they sailed into Sevastopol harbour. And a combination of all of those made it impossible for Russia to keep ships there anymore, because they're just too vulnerable. Big, expensive ships destroyed by a small missile or a small unmanned surface vehicle. So they moved them over there, which was just out of range of all the missiles. The missile range got to about here, and so it was just out of range, and the out of range of the surface missiles. And they also got lots of protection there in order to deal with the surface missiles. So the Russians' Black Sea Fleet is now there, but a third of it has been sunk by the Ukrainians, including the flagship. But the ships that are left, they're there. 2/3 of the ships still remain. Well, now Ukraine has built what they call the subsea baby, which is it came into the harbour of this and it sailed underneath the sea. And there's this video you can watch. You can watch the video of it the time just before the explosion, and then the explosion, and the Russians don't react at all. They clearly hadn't seen it. So the Ukrainians were able to sneak a submarine underwater, and from the amount of explosive, it's a very big explosion. It could easily be a ton or more of explosives. Huge explosion. And this is the likely path. They had to navigate through the harbour and around other ships and around the pier and then eventually get to there and then sink the submarine. So this is a new capability that no country in the world has as yet. Ukraine is the first country in the world to have this capability. So it's like a torpedo, but with a range of hundreds of kilometers. I think we are getting on for 1,000 kilometers there. It's quite a long distance from Crimea. Getting on for 1,000 kilometers. Maybe not quite, maybe 800 or something, I don't know, I have to look it up. But hundreds of kilometers, and unlike a torpedo, it can navigate all sorts of obstacles and just sail around them. And it probably is being controlled in real time, sending signal back in real time, or it might be that it's programmed very well. Either way, it's able to navigate all by itself, or more likely, I think, somehow they found a way to send it back real time from onto the sea, just below the sea, and then to blow up a submarine. And there were three submarines at dock. All three of Russia's diesel electric submarines that it has remaining in the Black Sea were in that dock. And Ukraine sunk just one of them. And this is not in the news. It's just you've got to go in a very geeky detail that you've got to go and look in naval news or Ukraine news, especially Ukrainian military news, or if you look at somewhere like Kiev Post, you'll find and you hunt around, you'll find it. But I think it's deliberate. I think they are underplaying this deliberately, because in all the discussions with and it's just like earlier on, this whole ceasefire negotiation started just a couple of days after the US sanctions on Lukoil and Rosneft came in. And Lukoil has had to, it's a big international, the biggest international, the Russian international oil company, and had oil refineries and oil operations all over the world. And it has had to sell just about all of its foreign assets. It's been selling oil refineries, or other countries have been seizing its oil refineries. And ever since, I think the 21st of November was when it happened. And all the ceasefire negotiations were started just immediately after that. But Trump, he may have been deliberately deflecting the way he attacked Zelensky and said, Zelensky's causing all the problems. And this distracted the mainstream news. And it barely got a ripple in the mainstream news that Lukoil had to divest just about all its holdings outside Russia. Big blow for the Russian oil industry. So now it's just a domestic oil company. And so that was a start of this. And then there's also India and China being very cautious about buying oil from Russia. And then there was Ukraine sinking, first of all destroying oil terminals, which didn't get much attention in the news, but putting them out of action for days at a time. Oil terminals that export Russian oil, and then sinking shadow oil tankers, not with oil on board, but the empty tankers going to the port in order to pick up oil. And it didn't sink them, it just damaged them so they couldn't be used anymore. And so they're very careful not to cause any kind of environmental problems. So that's what Ukraine's been doing so far. And this is the income coming into the Russian government has fallen off a cliff. And Russia has even had to sell physical gold to Russians, domestic Russians. It's forbidden from selling gold. It's got huge gold reserves, but it's forbidden from selling them abroad. And in order to help finance some aspects of the government, they've been selling physical gold, which is quite a remarkable thing for them to have to do to Russians who are buying this gold to fund the government. They're buying gold because it's gold, but that's helping fund the government. So the income has just gone off a cliff into the Russian government, and they can last. They've got huge domestic reserves. They can last for months, but seeing their domestic reserves go down, it can't be kind of very pleasant news for someone who's so focused on wealth as Putin is. As a trillionaire, and looking at the wealth and saying, look. And the people around him, the oligarchs, saying, look, what's happening? How can you let the Russian foreign and domestic reserves just start falling like this? And then you've got this, which is so this is, I think, and H.I. Sutton, who's an expert in unmanned drones, he talks about how the strategy is far more important than what they actually sunk. So they sunk a submarine, a diesel electric submarine that's would cost about $400 million to build. So that's quite a substantially expensive submarine. Amongst all the different things they could have sunk, this would be one of the most expensive of all those things that they've sailed past. But they could have sunk 3 of them. I don't believe that Ukraine's only got one subsea baby drone. I think they deliberately did not sink 3 of them. That's my personal view on this, my personal opinion, because I've been expecting something like this at some point, because back when Zelensky hinted he could liberate occupied Ukraine by owning but not using the Tomahawk. Well, one way he could have done that is by sinking the entire Black Sea Fleet. So, by not sinking the entire Black Sea Fleet. So, by saying to Putin, look, if I have the Tomahawks, it's time for a ceasefire. I'm not going to sink the Black Sea Fleet. Let's have a ceasefire. So, I think it's not impossible that they may have quite a lot of these subsea baby drones, and some private discussion of some sort going on between Ukraine and Putin that may be influencing Putin. And if it's not as direct as that, then certainly this would give Putin pause for thought. If he continues with this war, then is it really going to go Russia's way anymore? What if he starts seeing his Black Sea Fleet sinking ship by ship? Because there's very little they can do to actually stop this. It's extremely difficult to defend against undersea drones. It was difficult enough stopping the surface drones. And they seem to have damaged its propulsion system, and it might be repairable, but the only dry dock where they could repair this submarine is in Sevastopol. And there's no way they're going to tug this submarine over to Sevastopol to repair it, because it would then just be hit by storm shadows and Neptune cruise missiles. So essentially, this submarine is out of service, and it's a combatant in the war. It fires the caliber cruise missiles at Ukraine. So these submarines are just sitting in this harbour, and from there they fire these missiles at Ukraine. So it's a valid target for them to target in the war. So it's an excellent military psychological lever, because it's a valid target. And yet Putin would certainly not want to be the first Russian leader to have lost his entire Black Sea Fleet. That would be a bit like the leader of Prime Minister of the United Kingdom losing the UK Navy. He wouldn't want that to happen. But this made it clear that the Russian fleet is very, very vulnerable, and Russian technology is just not up to stopping the Ukrainian subsea drones. So, and then another thing recently, and so you saw the liberation of Kupiansk. So, let's see, have I got that further down the page here? Let's just, because I've got a few more minutes, and then I'll finish this, wrap it up. No, that's about the Donbass area. That's the area of Donbass. Let's just go through. I'll talk about the Kupiansk and a few other things. I think it's in here somewhere. So this is the area that it's actually Russia wanted Ukraine to withdraw from that, and then the Russians would be in charge of the area with the Russian Rosguardia National Military Police, and Ukraine that's a no. That's a very, very important area strategically for Ukraine, the Fortress Belt it's called. And so they're saying, we're willing to withdraw, but if it's a peaceful area, then it's not going to be under control of the Russians. That's essentially seems to be what Zelensky is saying. And so and then this is just about elections. I talked about how Winston Churchill. So there's all this going on and on about people going on about how Zelensky is supposedly is no longer a legitimate leader. His 5-year term is extended automatically by the Ukrainian constitution during wartime. And I just give the example here of Winston Churchill, and his 5-year term for his party was extended by yearly motions passed in Parliament. So Winston Churchill, he was chosen as leader for the Conservative Party, which based on the elections in 1935, which put the Conservative Party in power under Baldwin. And it put the party in power under Baldwin. And then eventually it ended up with Winston Churchill as the leader of the Conservative Party. But he didn't go to elections. They couldn't hold elections. It was actually the Blitz at the time that the elections would have been held. That's exactly when it happened. And they said, no, we can't do it with bombs falling on London all the time. And so they postponed it. They postponed it 1 year at a time until the end of the war. And that's essentially the same situation with Ukraine. And I just a good graphic about that. Now let's have a little look down here. Trying to find the section about Kupiansk. Have I got a thing about Kupiansk here somewhere? I don't seem to have it. It'll be here somewhere, but I missed it. I mean, I'll have a little look at that if I can find it quickly enough. Otherwise, I'll do that as a separate video. I think it might deserve a separate video anyway. Oh yes. Yeah, let's bring that up in a new tab. I think it'll come up. Right, yes. So there we go. Kupiansk. Let's go down. That'll be the one with Kupiansk. So this is where President Zelensky. So the background here. So I'll just briefly talk about Kupiansk for the last few minutes. So the background here is that Putin boasted in TASS, in the Russian state propaganda, that Russia had control of both Pokrovsk and Kupiansk. And he actually invited Western journalists to come to Kupiansk to see how in control Russia was. And that was back then. That was how Russia had control of it back then. But then the Ukrainians suddenly did a counteroffensive and took all this area back. And it's not very clear how they did it. And then they are not then, because you see it was a little bit precarious. They crossed the river and they were difficult for them to supply their forces. Now Ukraine has cut off the supplies, and then now in the situation today where there are about 200 soldiers left in Kupiansk and all their supplies are cut off, and they are being supplied by small items via drones by the Russians. And I mean they've probably been captured or killed by now, but that was the situation yesterday, I think. And the news is always a little bit behind when there's something major going on like this. So Ukraine was able to liberate Kupiansk, and this was one of the two cities that Putin was making a big deal of. And Zelensky posted this very dramatic video where he, there we are. So that is the sign for Kupiansk, what's left of it, and that's the Russian P. It looks like a pie, like a pie symbol, and that's the Y bit, the Kupiansk, I think, and that's the Y. Well, I don't know, maybe I forgot right. Anyway, that is the sign for Kupiansk, and that shows where he's doing it. It's just very close to where the Russians were still fighting, and so that's what I was just going to say, is that Putin has made such a big fuss of taking Pokrovsk and taking Kupiansk, and now he's lost Kupiansk. So just because the way he focused on just these minute little details of the front line, it's just 28,000 or so in peacetime, the city. It's not a very big city. And but this may also have been be a factor that is influencing Putin to perhaps be more amenable to peace. So there are quite a lot of things that are going on, things are not quite going Putin's way. So that's basically what's happening. Now can I go back to that previous page? Let me just see, how did I get there? Where am I? I'm not very familiar with Sorry, I'm just trying to find the page that I was on back then. Here we go. Right. And this is a new Android. This is my new Android. It's my new Android tab, Galaxy tab, and I'm not very familiar with the Android system. I'm just getting to know to work how Android works. So that's why sometimes get a bit glitchy. So anyway, so let's just go back to the heading, and so you see security guarantees close to sorted. Russia, is that the one? 7/16. Yes, the UK response on talks 90% done. And then, so what we've got left coming up, just to wrap up, is that over the next few days, Ukraine is going to send the final version to the US. It may have already done it by the time I finish this video. Then the US is going to be talking to Russia, and then assuming that Putin is interested in stopping this war, and as you can see, the quite a lot of pressures on Putin that will actually may make it more likely that he does agree to stop this war. Then it goes back to the United States, and they work then with the Ukrainian negotiators, possibly as soon as this weekend, getting the last 10% of the details sorted out, and that's in response to feedback from Russia as well on all that. And then if all that works well, then we may see a ceasefire and peace deal arrangements start to actually talk in earnest and talk at a high level with the leaders. And then I've got a section here about how to expect timescale where Putin does want to stop. So yes, formal signature is just ceremonial, and even if Putin won't sign a decree with Zelensky, that's not going to stop the process. If he really wants to stop, then so now this was it's not impossible they got as far as an agreement in principle to stop next week. That's this week. They haven't quite got there yet, but they might get there next week. And then once they've got to that, then that's not yet the ceasefire. So you need to allow a little bit of time, because once they agreed to the top level how to do it, then both teams need to work together how to implement the ceasefire. So a document is just a piece of paper that they've signed. It's not yet a ceasefire. In order to turn to a ceasefire and a peace treaty, you have to implement all the things in that document. And so that's be done, and that's be done thoroughly and carefully, and especially the ceasefire. So that's unlikely to be less than a week. So I think they could have a temporary ceasefire at Christmas, but it's running a little bit late to actually have the final ceasefire. And it looks like Russia's already said they're not interested in a ceasefire at Christmas, which is not surprising because it's not their Christmas day in Russia. That's the 7th of January. So I think for Russia they would want it before the Orthodox Christmas on January 7th, if they have a date, and the likely time would be New Year. So maybe if they get it really together, and if Ukraine is talking to US as soon as this weekend, then perhaps the next week, this is very optimistic, but if you look at the most optimistic timeline, then early next week, then you might get a meeting, well, Trump with Zelensky and Trump with Putin, and going back and forth several times, maybe a meeting with Zelensky and Putin, but maybe not. It doesn't matter. And then eventually they come to a common agreement, and they've all agreed on what they're going to do and who does what when. And then it would be the low-level teams who would start talking to each other about how exactly to implement it, the generals and so on as well, talking about who does what when, how they're going to stop the fighting, because it's very difficult to stop fighting on both sides when the soldiers have been fighting all along. And it's very normal in the first day after ceasefire that a somewhat panicking soldier lets off a shot because he thinks that the Russians have broken the ceasefire on the Ukrainian side, they let off a shot or the other way around. And so to start with, they won't trust the other side to actually keep to the ceasefire, and then gradually, bit by bit, then they separate from each other, and then you get the ceasefire would gradually become more and more settled over a period of week, 2 weeks, so on. So if they were to start this process, say next week, then that would be like the 20th, 21st, 22nd, or something like that. If they were then to start it really in earnest by then they could have a ceasefire actually in place and starting maybe before New Year, still possible. And then there would be breaches of it, and then gradually over. So that's the most optimistic. Is that that's the most optimistic situation? And then I've also looked at the worst case. So we should look at the worst case, not just the most optimistic case. And so the best case, a peace treaty and a ceasefire, possibly even before the New Year. And then the worst case is that peace negotiations continue as a marathon. So I don't think it's likely that Trump will walk away from this deal now. It's so detailed. He's so committed to it now. So I think the worst case is that the war continues and negotiations start again with a revision of this plan. And much of it seems like it's staying in place now because Russia has agreed to a lot of it. So the worst case would be something like that they get nearly there, but then Putin could just say no and say I'm just going to continue with the war, and maybe Trump has got it wrong, and he's just not really honest, genuine about it. In that case, the United States will come in with much stronger sanctions. The Ukrainians will start taking more Russian chips and all sorts of things, and then in various ways persuade Putin that it really is a good time to start with on a ceasefire. And the other perhaps more likely possibility is that they get nearly there, and Putin and Zelensky are just not able to come to an agreement on Donbass, and they have to revise those plans, and the negotiations continue for another week or two or several weeks and so on. So the very worst case, which is what Zelensky talks about, so he sees this as a possibility, his plan B, is that the war just continues for another couple of years, and Ukraine needs funding in order to continue the war to defend itself from Russia. So that would be the worst of the worst possible cases, is that it just continues as it is now. But I think given the
5 p.m.
I should turn that off. Given the way that it's going at the present, then I don't think either those worst cases are very likely. I think the worst case is more likely to not quite getting there with a ceasefire and having to maybe have multiple tries, and that is very normal. So please don't expect it that they complete the ceasefire and agree to it on the first round of top-level meetings between Trump and Putin and Zelensky. They might get nearly there, and then it doesn't quite get across the line. And then they have another round of talks, and then maybe Trump tries to put more pressure on either Zelensky or Russia to try and get across that extra little bit. But I think eventually it does look very promising that that we actually are headed for a ceasefire and an end to the war. And not just that, it looks like a very secure end from Ukraine's point of view. So that's it. I mean, it does look extremely positive. Not to the point that you should not to the point that you should say, oh, it's over. You can't say that quite yet. The deal isn't a deal until it's a deal, until it's finished. But it does look very positive. So that's so don't kind of assume it's going to be a ceasefire and a peace deal before New Year. But it's certainly okay to be kind of optimistic and hopeful and positive about this, because there is significant possibility of it, and there's definitely a light at the end of the tunnel for this, and we see the way ahead. So anyway, that's what I'm saying. You can look in the video description. You will find a link to the Substack, and then so I'll upload this, and then you can listen to it. And so hope that helps some of you with your fears about the Ukraine war and things. And there's no risk whatsoever to NATO. There never has been.